This is Stereoactive Presents. I'm your host, Jeremiah McVay, and in this episode, I'm joined by Charles Hinshaw to discuss the latest installment in the Mission Impossible franchise, Dead Reckoning Part 1. We'll also discuss the ongoing strikes by members of the WGA and SAG-AFTRA, the unions that represent writers and actors working in film and television. Charles happens to be a member of SAG-AFTRA, so he'll offer his particular perspective as part of our conversation. All right, so I am here with Charles Hinshaw. Chuck, thanks for joining me here again. I'm glad to have you back finally.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, so since it has been a while and we've been hoping to make this more a regular thing, and maybe we will after this, but I wanted to see kind of what you've been watching this year, because the last time we got together, Jackie and I, we talked about the Oscars for last year and a lot of what we'd been watching since our old show that we used to do together. So what are your favorite movies of the year so far?
I don't know.
Well, what are some you've been watching then, if that's easy?
Yeah, I've really been watching older movies, and I haven't seen much this year off the top of my head. I recently rewatched the original All Quiet on the Western Front. I love that. And I've been watching stuff from that time period, the 1930, some silent stuff. And then also I've gotten into, which is very kind of typical of the modern age, I got way into movie reactors on YouTube. And I don't know if, and it's kind of a fun way to watch like your favorite movies in 45 minutes. And
tell me about that. I actually haven't engaged with that, so tell me what that's like.
It's almost a guilty pleasure because it seems so silly, like why it's interesting. But basically, these people are watching movies for the first time that, in my case, and I think a lot of people's cases, we've seen over and over and over again. Stuff like Apollo 13 and The Matrix and Happy Gilmore. And I mean, it's a lot of 90s stuff. There's a lot of nostalgia. It's a lot of just like hits and classics, new classics or whatever, that for whatever reason, these people haven't seen them. And it's kind of fun to watch people get psyched about stuff that you're psyched about.
Right.
And from an editing standpoint and like a technical standpoint, I do find it really interesting to see how, because most of them are set up so that they have a YouTube version, which is like usually around 45 minutes, where they cut up the movie. And then if you want to see the full reaction, you buy their Patreon. I do a lot of like watching in the background at the moment. And so that's really ideal for that. And then, the 30s movies are really ideal because they're like all the same movie. And it's just kind of interesting to have that play and kind of just be in that vibe. But there hasn't been much released that I've been that interested in seeing.
Really?
I wanted to see Past Lives. That's like the one movie that I was like, oh, I'm curious to see that. Yeah. But I didn't actually go.
I've heard good things about that.
It seems like a lot of other things have been sequels. Oh, John Wick 4. I saw that.
Yeah.
I liked that. A lot of other stuff has been like sequels and stuff that I'm just not, like I didn't see Guardians because I kind of bailed on Marvel. There just hasn't been much that's caught my interest.
I mean, I understand that. Like I'm kind of in the same boat. I mean, part of it for me is that like I just don't have the ability to get out as much. I've, a kid and so that really like
right
lowers your chances of getting out to see a movie as often as like we used to go to see movies for the old podcast we used to work on. But I did see a handful of things other than Mission Impossible, which is the movie we're mainly going to be talking about in this episode. I think my favorite two movies of the year so far are Wes Anderson's Asteroid City, which I liked a whole lot. I mean, it's like the most Wes Anderson-y movie, maybe. So, like, bear that in mind. And then Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I thought it was really fun and really well made, but also has a thing that we'll talk about similar to Mission Impossible of like, it's really part one of a story and kind of leaves you hanging. So we'll get to that. I also saw John Wick 4. I feel like I need to see it again because I saw it with an audience. It was a little distracting and I felt like I was never able to like really sink into the movie in that way that you want to, where you're just like in it and, you know, experiencing it. I was always sort of
what
like
was
aware.
Were people talking?
People who were just kind of talking and like getting up and walking in and out of the movie theater a lot. It was very obnoxious. It was a rowdy crowd. So you know, that takes you out of it, and it's not the fault of the movie. I'm sure it was better than the experience I had. So like I said, I'd like to see that again. I thought Guardians, I saw that one, Guardians of the Galaxy, and it's probably this. I know this isn't saying much, but it's probably the best Marvel movie of the last few years, because they have been kind of trash since Endgame, or at least diminishing returns, if not trash. But and again, like I don't think this installment of Guardians is as good as the first two, but I do think it's better than, like I said, the other Marvel movies that have been out lately.
Wasn't Ant-Man this year too?
Yeah, I didn't even bother with that. Yeah, I didn't even bother with Ant-Man because the word on that one was just like so abysmal. Like I just was like, I'm not gonna bother. Like I have too many other things to do with my life. Yeah, but the other two movies I saw from 2023, other than Mission Impossible, were Blackberry and Air. So, you know, the Attack of the Brands, Brands the movie franchise or something, whatever. But Blackberry was pretty good. Air, I found a little flat. That was not supposed to be a pun. But,
I was curious about Air, and I just got that sense of, you know, despite the fact that Ben Affleck and Matt Damon are sort of painting themselves as these auteurs of the Hollywood system, it seemed really kind of cookie cutter, and I wasn't really like that feverish to see it because of that.
Yeah, I think it's worth watching on video. I'm sure it's available already. I haven't checked because like I said, I saw it in theaters, and it was kind of a letdown. Like it was weird. It always seemed like they were in a sketch, but not funny. But I kept expecting them to try to be funny, so it's just like very weird to watch. Like I just couldn't take it seriously. And I do think the fact that it's sort of about Michael Jordan, but Michael Jordan is not a character in it, is like the way they do it, I thought was distracting. In a way that if everything else in the movie was working, that wouldn't have taken me out of it. But because other parts of the movie weren't working as fully as I thought they could, it did, you know, so that didn't work for me. But Blackberry, I thought was a better version of this like recent trend of movies about like nostalgia brands for our generations, you know, or whatever you want to call them.
Right.
And I think the reason that it was more interesting is because it's about a failed one. Whereas like Air is like about a giant success, and Tetris. I didn't see that movie. I've heard it's pretty good, but like I've heard that similarly, it's kind of like about something that succeeded in a way. So maybe the dramatic tension isn't as great as like with something with Blackberry. And I got to say, Glenn Howerton's pretty damn good in it too. Like kind of a surprising turn from him in a way. Well, why don't we move on? I do want to talk to you before we get to Mission Impossible about the strikes that are happening right now as we're recording this. Like the WGA has been on strike for a little while now, and then SAG-AFTRA, the actors union, went on strike last week as we're recording this. And you happen to be a member of SAG-AFTRA, so I'm particularly interested in your point of view, but also just like generally about what this has to say about this medium that we both are fans of and like to indulge in and sometimes participate in ways.
Yeah. Well, from like the union member standpoint, it was an interesting ride because way before there was a strike, there were rumors that there might be a strike.
Right.
And then President Fran Drescher sent out a video with Duncan Crabtree Ireland, I believe is his name. They mentioned that negotiations were going well. Things seemed to be going well. And then a bunch of actors sent this letter being like, don't give up, don't give anything. Like, don't tell us it's going well when we need you to fight for us, blah, blah, blah. And now the line is, it's, corporate greed is taking over and we need to strike in order to stem that tide.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not on the inside of any of it. I'm not even, the strike is supposedly for jobbing actors and would probably benefit me. I voted to strike or to give authorization to strike because I'm like pro-union and pro-strike and pro-people sort of doing what they got to do to get what they deserve.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I heard about this AI thing, the studios were pitching like that you would essentially eliminate the need for background actors. That seemed really egregious and
to say the least, yeah.
And insane that they would think that anybody would be okay with that.
And they kind of pitch it as like some big solution.
I think so. Yeah, I think they saw it as like, in a way it seems like the studios and the streamers aren't considering the jobbing actor, and they are just like, well, you'll still have your stars, you'll still have your your under fives and your co-stars and all this stuff. But they don't think about where I saw an interview with Kira Sedgwick where she said that the people who run these companies are tech people, not creatives. Mm-hmm. So they don't really get how it works.
I don't even know if they're tech people. I think they're just money people.
Yeah. I know that. And that's part of the thing with the strike is I have to take everything I hear with a little bit of a grain of salt because I'm not in it and I'm not on any committees or sure. I get like one job a year, that kind of thing. But if that's what they're thinking of doing and that to them is reasonable, then that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I don't know about the pay stuff. Like what they claim that wages and residuals have gone down. I have no way of knowing how that's true. It probably is, but
yeah. Well, yeah. I think they're essentially the residuals for streaming are next to nothing.
Right.
I've seen people explain this who have experience with it, where like they one instance was somebody who was in the Pitch Perfect movie, I think the first one, and he's not an actor, and it's the only job he's ever done. Yeah. But he was recruited to be in the movie because he was in a glee club at a college nearby or something. So they cast him to be somebody in one of the, I guess, rival choirs or whatever they are. I've never seen the movie. And because they had him singing, it counted as lines, and he got a pretty healthy residual. He talked about it as like he was able to pay his rent for a year while he was in grad school for something that was like not a thing to him. He's not an actor, so he was coming at it from that perspective of like, if this did this for me, think of somebody who this is their profession and like they're trying to make a living at it. Like it used to be something that people could make a living at, and then I've seen that next to people talking about like they literally get like pennies for streaming. And let's also like something we talked about on our old podcast from time to time. I think like the streamers are very opaque about their numbers, and that's part of this, that they hide how successful the films are so they can do like the worst version of Hollywood accounting, something that studios were already doing before streamers existed, of like basically saying that any movie was a financial failure through like creative accounting, just so they wouldn't have to pay out on points on the back end for actors who had those kind of deals and residuals and stuff like that. But, like in the streaming world, like the payment is already like next to nothing. And then they say like, oh, basically this movie, they'll say at the same time, like, oh, it's the most popular movie we've ever had, but also we made no money off of it. You know?
Right.
So it's like, it's just ridiculous and like fantasy land. But yeah, I don't know. So
yeah, I don't know either. I mean, I get that. I guess I kind of not being, we don't have those numbers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also not very talented in the accounting department. So I can understand from like how streaming is a different beast to selling tickets and selling units and stuff like that. So I can understand that there's something that needs to shift as far as all that is concerned, and sort of adapt to the model, because the model is clearly here to stay.
Yeah.
But it can't be this one-sided thing of like, well, we put up all this money and we don't make any, because that just doesn't.
Well, it's not true. I mean,
yeah.
There's plenty of people like posting about how, like the very numbers that they say that they would need to hit to meet the demands of the unions. You put it against any of these CEOs' compensation, and it's like, well, there it is.
Yeah.
This person is taking all the money.
But also, they're going back to YouTube reactors. There are YouTube reactors who do that for a living. So if you can sit on YouTube and watch movies and react to them and make a living doing it, I don't see how somehow you're not making money.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Putting content out there.
Exactly.
And that kind of
because people on YouTube get a bigger cut of the pie than anybody associated with the streaming show, other than like the top executives at the company.
Right.
You know? So yeah, it's all sorts of ridiculous. There's all sorts of hypocrisy going on. I definitely think it's good that these people are like standing up for what I think they need for this industry to continue and be successful, especially in the wake of like so much distress in recent years.
Right.
And I also think it hopefully is setting some sort of goal pole or standard or whatever you want to call it for like labor as a whole, not just in the entertainment industry, but like and they're not the only ones who've been striking in recent years. I think this is higher profile because it's media related. And if you watch CNN or any of these news corporations that are owned by the people who are being struck against, like you get these like interpretations of what's happening that make it seem like it's bad for the industry. I don't know, whatever. I'm like going down a rabbit hole.
No, yeah, I think there's also something to be said for, actors can get very precious about what they do, and there's always this thing of like, it's not brain surgery and all this kind of thing, but it's pretty evident that entertainment is a sizable portion of our society.
Yeah.
And streaming and binge watching and, ingesting that content is really valuable to people.
Yeah.
So, and something that touches everybody. So I think it's also higher profile in that regard.
Yeah, this is something I've been preaching for at least a few years now, of like, especially around music, because I deal with a lot of musicians through other work I do and through Stereoactive Media. But people don't want to value it. And it also, in the case of music, I think a lot of musicians don't even know that they should value it as much as they should. Like, it's something that they produce. It's something that they make, and it's something that they should be compensated for. And I think it's really easy for people in this day and age to be like, it's so easy for me to get this through this platform that all I have to do is pay like some small amount of money, relatively speaking, per month, and I get so much content. So what's the problem? Like, it works for me, but like if that went away, if all that went away, everybody would be crying about it.
Yeah.
And it's just, but people don't realize that that is like an actual possibility in a sense, I think.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe they need to be made to figure that out for themselves.
Yeah. I mean,
So,
it seems like it. I think that's a lot of human behavior. Is it's one thing to be like, what if this wasn't here? It's another
yeah,
thing to actually take it away and
right.
see what happens.
Exactly. So we'll see how long the strike lasts. And
Yeah,
when we
who
get to a
knows?
point where they've run out of banked content, so to speak,
Right.
to peddle out to people.
It's just game
So,
shows, just wall-to-wall game shows.
yeah. And I do want to say also, just as sort of a disclaimer or whatever you want to call it, there's been a discussion I've seen around criticism of movies and television of like, is it okay? Does that count as promotion? And like criticism and reviewing is not promotion. Like I don't think it is.
No.
And like as long as you're kind of framing anything to do with what we're talking about, I think in the way that I think we're talking about it, like
Right.
I think you're being supportive of the industry that you're trying to not promote, but like be enthusiastic about, because at heart, if you're reviewing a piece of art, it's because you're a fan of the medium,
Yeah.
So anyway,
Is this like they want people like you to go on strike with the actors and
no, they
not
don't.
promote?
Like that's what I'm saying is like some people have questioned like should people like me or us or people who do this like more regularly, like writing for big publications or doing like bigger podcasts, like should they be
Right.
shutting down or something?
Yeah.
And I think it's been pretty well said that like that's not a part of this.
Yeah. No. It's
So
not.
I feel like we're in the clear to talk about a movie that we like, because
Yeah.
to talk about it is also to support the people who are in the movie who are on strike, because not to support them, but to like give some awareness of this thing. And if we like the movie, great. If we don't, that's what we'll say. But
Yeah.
should we get to it then?
Yeah. Let's get to it.
Sorry if that was a like a long-winded, confusing way of saying like it's okay to talk about movies, even
No,
though
I think
they're on
it's
strike.
fair. I think it's
Yeah,
fair. It's also
but
not, they're pretty, SAG is pretty clear about what they're, I mean, there are some movies they're allowing to stay in production. So it's like, it's not a cut and dry
right.
thing.
Right, totally. So let's go ahead and take a quick break. And when we're back, I will have my review of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, and then Chuck and I will talk about it. Once again, Ethan Hunt stands between the safety of the world as we know it and a shadowy conspiracy looking to upturn said world. The difference this time is that the shadowy conspiracy essentially is the world as we know it, or at least as we've constructed it digitally. It's part luck and part prescience on the part of the filmmakers that the villain of this installment of Tom Cruise's 3-decade franchise is artificial intelligence, a force that has dominated much of the news in recent months. That a film which has been in the works for years could not only hit this nerve of the zeitgeist so squarely, but also at a time when people in our real world who pretend to be other people or who facilitate the made-up narratives that those people inhabit are on strike because of the constructed digital reality we now live in, along with the threat of AI, is at least mildly uncanny, and that the movie does it with the usual flair of so many practical stunts and effects rather than going full-on CGI, as so many other tentpole franchise action movies do these days, is at least mildly ironic. Just as with the other Christopher McQuarrie directed entries in the series, the mechanics of the plot and the action set pieces bring to mind a Rube Goldberg machine that once set in motion doesn't really ever stop. And it's become pretty obvious that the action in the series, much like its younger cousin/rival, the John Wick series, is at least partly, if not largely, inspired by silent comedy daredevils like Buster Keaton. I mean, it's hard to see an old train go over a destroyed bridge and not make some sort of connection, whether intended or not. But this one also had a bit more humor than has been present in some of the more dire recent installments. And all of this is great for any fan of action movies or of just Tom Cruise. But just as with many other big franchises lately, we'll have to wait and see if they stick the landing, since it's left wide open for part 2. And just as with those other franchises, if part 2 keeps up the quality of part 1, or better yet, builds and improves on it, then it will have all been worth our time and money. But if part 2 fails to at least sustain what came before, then it will likely deflate this one in retrospect as well. From here on, we may discuss the film in a way that may contain spoilers, so if you don't want to hear anything about the movie at this time, please do skip over this part, but we hope you'll come back and listen to it at some point. So, Chuck, what are your thoughts initially on Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1? It's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is. I really like the title, but I think it kind of gets undersold with the whole Part 1 thing. And it makes me kind of think about the whole this Part 1 bit.
The trend, you mean?
Yeah, the trend.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I'm a fan of it.
Yeah, it's not the greatest.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it made sense with Dune because the whole idea was to like split the book and do it faithfully. But I had a similar feeling with this that I did with Dune, which was like, this is awesome, but it's unfinished.
Yeah.
And I would have, I think, enjoyed, like, you can do a movie with a cliffhanger or with an open sort of ending to suggest a sequel without having to make it such a, just like cut right in the middle, like, right. Okay, we're going to end it now and we'll tell you the rest later sort of thing. And I think I would have enjoyed something more like that, kind of wrapped up a little bit. I mean, I loved this movie. I don't have. I think my criticisms are just about its inability to do what you would want it to do, which is live up to the previous one, and I just think that's kind of impossible. And the thing about it is, I went into Fallout with this sort of sense of, the last one was really great, Rogue Nation was really great. And I just think that, this one's probably going to suck because how can you maintain that? And then it was so great.
Right.
And so I really lowered expectations. I was like, there's just no way they can repeat it. You can't. And interestingly, I've heard, you said in your review, and I've heard other people mention that there's more humor and levity in this one. I kind of found this one to be darker than the previous McQuarrie installments.
Well, I kind of think both things can be true, though.
Yeah. I mean, there's always been not so much in 1 and 2, but since 3, there's always been like these little sort of aside goofy things, and I think probably Ghost Protocol like goes the most in that direction of being kind of fun and having like silliness wrapped up in the missions.
Sure. And
then Fallout definitely has some somber moments and raising the stakes and having an emotional sort of element there. But I wouldn't say it was dark. I feel like this one was dark in a way that maybe the first one is comparable, but that the other ones are not.
Well, can I offer my take on your take?
Sure. Yeah.
I wonder if you feel like this one is darker because it's a little closer to our reality through its premise. It's about our digital world turning on us and AI becoming a threat, an overwhelming threat. So like, I feel like that is a more that's more reflected in our real world of the moment that this movie comes out than like whatever Fallout was about. Like Fallout was a ton of fun.
Yeah.
Great action movie. And I'm not saying it doesn't have some connection to reality, but like, I think it was more tenuous or more removed, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah. And it's pretty standard, like nuclear weapons someone's going to blow up a nuclear device and they got to defuse the bomb and that kind, I mean, there's nothing that's like every action movie
right
since, the 90s or whatever. But, so yes, I do think there is something to be said for the connection to our real world and kind of making something that's scary in our real world the villain and the scary element of the new one. But to go into a spoiler, I think showing Ethan lose someone in the way that he does
right
is a real like shift in the series.
Right.
And I saw a review where someone criticized the decision as like, best actress, lead actress swapping. But to me, I thought it was a very cynical way of looking at it. Like, to me, it makes sense that in order to raise the stakes, Ethan has to lose somebody. And I also really liked how they showed you this process of getting recruited into the IMF through Hayley Atwell's character.
Right. Yeah. That was kind of a new wrinkle on this whole thing, right? Like, I don't think we've seen before that it's this choice, as they call it, where like you've maybe screwed up something and are on the wrong side of the law, perhaps. And you have a choice of like, you can either come to work in this shadowy way or go to prison or whatever punishment might be out there for you. Like, that's new, right? I'm not forgetting.
It's new. It makes sense in terms of Luther's character, because in the first movie they talk about him being this like master hacker who hacked into NATO and all this kind of stuff. So it follows a line that they've sort of had of, okay, you're gonna bring people over, but we never really knew Ethan as being that way. Right. And the movie suggests that he is, or he was. Right. And I guess it suggests that all of them are. Yeah. And it kind of makes, and it also makes sense in terms of 2, where he like recruits the jewel thief. So it's not something new, but to be very blatant in it and to kind of show it as a process.
Yeah. They make it explicit rather than hinted at. And but like, I think what you're pointing out is that it's earned in that way, that they've like laid some breadcrumbs, and whether that was ever the intention before, they looked at those movies probably and were like, this makes logical sense. Right. And we can say this based on what's happened before, and it doesn't negate that stuff. It builds off of it. Yeah. But I think that also is like, to your point about the perhaps cynicism, perhaps not, of killing off Rebecca Ferguson's character. I think that that's also something that is earned. Like, there are other filmmakers who kill off a character to establish stakes, and sometimes it can be cynical and egregious, if you want to call it that, in a lot of cases. But like, this is a character who's been there and been important and been exciting for the last, is this her
2? Yeah, this is their 3rd. Yeah,
this is their 3rd movie, and there's been like a real rapport, a real chemistry between them. Yeah, that hasn't been a pre-existing element between him and like a female lead or a supporting character before, really. Right. Like, does she die in the first one? But like, we don't know her any better than anybody else.
No.
I can't remember now. It's been a while since I watched the first one.
Yeah, there was. But, I mean, he also didn't have. I mean, she was a team member and she betrayed him. It was, it was sort of a catch-22 in a way on that one. And then obviously he had a wife and everything, but like but Rebecca Ferguson's character was his equal, and that was what was kind of exciting about it. And they had this really fun sort of thing where they were, she particularly was always kind of playing against him, but trying not to like hurt him.
Right.
And that sort of thing that they were, and they developed, I feel like McQuarrie's really interested in this because it's mentioned in Rogue Nation where they start to delve into why Ethan is the way he is with things like, Jeremy Renner's character saying like, you just want to beat the guy who beat you, and sort of setting up this thing of like a psyche behind this brazenness that he has. And I thought it was a really interesting and tragic twist to have it have to show him lose for once. And which then I read a review where someone was like, and he throws a woman's face against a wall and why that was necessary. And I'm just like, what is it? Like, she's a villain who is gonna bash his head in with a pipe. I don't see why. Like, it seemed kind of like white knighting. I don't know. I didn't really get it. I didn't really get why that mattered.
That character is clearly set up to be able to take care of herself and be able to withstand that fight, and that doesn't really damage her all that much.
And he needs to
other people have suffered worse, I think.
Yeah, totally. That seemed like such an odd thing to me. But it was, I really appreciated that whole sequence. With him being trapped and her fighting, and you knew it was coming. Like, I mean, it's not really a surprise. I wasn't that surprised. I was like, they're gonna kill her. But it was still meaningful when it happened.
Well, I want to come back to the shadowy conspiracy here, the entity, the AI entity that is the real villain behind the scenes, I guess you could call it. What did you think of the portrayal of this?
I think it's a smear campaign against AI, and I don't know.
I meant more like the portrayal on screen, like the way that they presented it, of like the visual representation, and the kind of like rumbling growl it had at a certain point.
Yeah, I didn't totally get it. Like, I didn't totally get from the beginning. I didn't understand where it was. I didn't understand who was controlling it. I didn't understand how the party was its party, like it's Blofeld or something. I didn't.
Hey, you're in the same boat as the characters in the movie. If you don't get it.
Yeah, I wasn't 100% on like how it worked, and this whole thing of like whoever holds the key controls it.
Right.
Like, okay, fair enough, but it seems to be doing shit without the key. So I don't like I mean.
Well, no, I think the key gives you control over it. Right now it's out of control, right?
Okay, yeah.
So you get to harness it and rein it in.
And it's in the submarine, right? That's where it is?
I guess so. That wasn't really clear until the end, where they seemed to be saying that. Like, before, I thought it was just that it was attacking the submarine, and for some reason they had the key for this. I don't know. Okay.
Like, so it attacks the submarine so that it can do.
Well, it attacks the submarine because well, first of all, it is the submarine, but it's attacking itself to free itself.
Right. I guess. That was the part that I was not. There was a lot going on in the movie, and I thought there was plenty to like grab onto.
Yeah.
I think if they didn't have some of the other elements they had to grab onto, I would be like, what the hell is this? I don't know what is going on.
I mean, this is the kind of stuff that like you can kind of hand wave over because the rest of the movie is working. So you can be like, I'll let this go. Like, I don't need to understand this. And there's this part too. They'll explain it maybe if it needs to be explained.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not like they, I think I read something where they point out that the diabolical plot has never really been the point with these movies.
Yeah, it's always MacGuffins.
Yeah, usually. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's either MacGuffins or it's like really simple, it's like nuclear weapons or classified files or something, just like shit that like is not as important as how they get from point A to point, how they get back.
It's just the thing that starts the mechanism working of the plot and the stunts.
Yeah.
So but I do think they've gotten better in a way of like hiding or obscuring, maybe is the better word, that's there. Like I think with Fallout, they really hit their stride. And with this one, we'll see once part 2 comes out. I feel like so much hinges on the success of that movie.
It really does.
But, and the other thing with the Entity, of course, is that it has this sort of like, they call it the Messiah of the Entity, right? The Gabriel character. Who's like a real person who is sort of a ghost in the world because the Entity is constantly erasing him from the digital surveillance and all this. I was a little more on the fence about this character than I've heard some other people who were like really into this actor who I've seen in other things. But like I was kind of surprised he was in, like, I don't know. This seems like almost somebody, I don't want to sound mean, but someone like hitting above their weight class. Does that make sense?
It does. I really like Esai Morales. I always knew his name, but couldn't have pointed him out to you until Ozark. I really liked him in that. I thought he was really like good at being menacing. And I appreciated that part of him in this movie. I read that originally it was going to be Nicholas Hoult, which I am like, no, I don't know.
Well, I've got an alternative casting for you based on my my misseeing, because like, you know, when these trailers come out for these big movies, sometimes like the only thing you see is like a split second shot of somebody. I could have swore the first time I saw a trailer for this that it was Antonio Banderas.
Oh, sure.
Like it was like just, you know, dark lit, you know, whatever, and the like high angle or something. I was like, oh, going back to Interview with a Vampire here. You know? But I think he would have been good as this villain character. And I'm not saying that what's his name?
Esai Morales. Yeah.
Esai Morales. I'm not saying he's bad or anything. Like, I think he's another element for me that like it depends on what happens in part 2. Like, I'm not quite sure yet.
I don't think he's fully formed, and you have this weird connection between him and Ethan from the past that's totally just like, oh, by the way, there's this little bit. We'll get to it in the next one. They just don't go really far in. And the woman, talking about like people who look alike, at first, I thought the woman who was killed in his past was Hayley Atwell. Because I thought they looked so similar. Yeah. And then he runs into her and there's like no recognition. I'm like, oh, I guess that's a totally different actress.
He's definitely got a type. Because
brunettes.
Yeah.
You know, like strikingly beautiful brunettes.
Yeah. He's got a type.
He's got a type.
A type for platonic love.
Yeah, a type for like...
That's the other thing that's interesting about these movies is like he refuses to engage in any romance.
But I feel like there's the suggestion of romance with Rebecca Ferguson's character. They just don't go... Because they like, you know, cuddle or whatever in Venice. They just don't go the full like, let's have a sex scene or whatever.
Right.
But I feel like there's that suggestion that
I couldn't tell if it was full on suggesting that they have a relationship or that it could be headed there, or that they're just like that close somehow and it's not sexual.
It could be. Yeah, it could be.
I don't know. But these are sexless movies in a big way. I know. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. It is, because there's not usually there is, especially in the spy genre. Yeah. That's like a big part of it. And yeah, it's just not. It's not on the radar. It's not what Ethan Hunt cares about. You know.
Well, it isn't. Because like I do think that's another thing that they've set up, especially since I think part 3,
right,
where his motivation through so much of these movies is to keep, and he states it in this, is to keep the people around him safer than he keeps himself.
Right,
and that includes like. That includes his, I guess, ex-wife. Are they technically ex, or is she like sort of like officially a widow? You know,
but well, she's married to another guy, so
I know.
Maybe she's a bigamist.
She might be. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that is so much of his motivation, is that he had this experience where he put her into danger.
Yeah.
Or she got sucked into the danger, and he's sort of swore that he's never going to let that happen again. And part of that seems to be that he's a monk, essentially.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Well, yeah. it's just not the same level of sexuality that you get in most, and certainly in Bond, or even it's even more sexless than the Daniel Craig Bonds, which is saying a lot. About those. So yeah, but I think it's cool. I think it's nice that it doesn't need it.
Yeah. I don't miss it or anything. It's just it's something worth remarking on sometimes.
Yeah, I think so.
It's noticeable sometimes
for sure.
Yeah, and one thing I do want to ask about is I like Shea Wiggum as an actor. He's someone who like he grew on me eventually. Like I think because of like the early parts I saw him in, he was always this like character that I didn't like. So I just thought I didn't like him as an actor. You know, ever have
sure.
that happen?
Yeah, totally.
But eventually I came to respect. I was like, oh, this guy's good. He's solid. And I like seeing him pop up and stuff. But what the fuck is this character?
Yeah.
It's just like so like it seems tangential. I'm hoping it's another thing that is going to sort of like get figured out in the second movie, because there seems to be some history. Like there's that implication that from his partner at one point, who he says like he asks him something about, is it personal? And I don't remember what it was, but there's something to hint that there's some personal connection or something.
Yeah.
Oh, he says like, do you know him personally? I think. And he says no, and he says, but it is personal, right?
Right.
He doesn't really answer, but he doesn't really answer in that way that it's clear that it's a yes.
Yeah. Right.
I think that was the exchange.
Yeah. That's right.
So I don't know. What do you think? What do you think of his character? Where do you think
I don't know.
going?
It seems like they're setting up this sort of group of internal agents that can be on Hunt's side, while Kittredge and others are always trying to screw him over.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it seemed like. By the end of the movie, that's what it seemed like they were doing.
Right.
That they were setting up, and that perhaps the larger sort of story will be about, you know, this kind of fundamental restructuring of the government agency overseeing the IMF and all that kind of stuff, which tends to be what each movie is kind of about. But they're like,
it's funny how much they repeat some of these things.
Yeah. It is. I mean, he's been like Ethan Hunt's been rogue pretty much every time except 2. I think 2's the only time he wasn't really that rogue. But
that's the thing, is like in this movie they kind of explain that away of like they are rogue by nature. Like they don't exist.
Yeah.
They're the people that you hope will pick up your call and like do something for you when you don't know how to do it yourself.
Yeah.
So I don't know. There's an element of that you are just rogue. You're out there in the wind just waiting for someone to need you.
Right.
So
it really is it's funny because have you ever heard of Neil Breen?
I've heard of, yes.
So through movie reactors, I got introduced to Neil Breen, or the Breenverse as it's called. And Neil Breen is like, for those who don't know, which is probably all of you, makes horrendous movies. And I don't know if all of them do, but certainly like one of the most famous ones, which is called Fateful Findings, which is the one I saw YouTube reactor react to, is all about like government conspiracies and shit.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw the end of it, I was like, this is like an alt-right wet dream, because it's all about like government agencies being like, yep, we're liars, and then killing themselves. And that's like the end of the movie. But somebody made the joke that opening scene in the CIA office was like a Neil Breen scene, because it was just like jargon, you know, buzzword, government conspiracy buzzword, blah, blah, blah. And I do kind of feel like McQuarrie got a little like dialogue happy in this one.
Yeah, I that was one place where I enjoyed the scene, and I typically enjoy that kind of scene, even though it really at base makes absolutely no sense.
Right.
Doesn't add anything. I'm not even talking about the jargon, just like the way they finish each other's sentences. I'm like, this is so rehearsed. Like, did these people all go into another conference room and like work it out before they went into the boss? Like,
Right, right.
like it's just like insane. That's
Yeah.
not how anyone talks.
And it didn't, I don't know that it added anything, because it again explains what the IMF is, which is like, it's the 7th movie, man. We know.
I know, but it did. That is where they gave the new wrinkle, though, I think, of like, I didn't understand that they're basically like.
Right, the whole ghost thing.
Yeah. So I
That's
thought
true.
Kittredge's explanation was good. I also just enjoyed seeing, what's that comedian's name? John Delaney?
Oh, yeah.
Is that his
Rob
name?
Delaney.
Rob Delaney, yeah. I'm mixing him up with John Mulaney, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, Rob Delaney just in this. Like,
I know, that was so
role.
random.
It was very funny.
It was funny. And I thought about it afterwards, because what's funny about this movie is it's so much movie that the beginning feels like a different movie from the end. Yeah. And I was like, oh yeah, Rob Delaney was in it, and he just like was never in it again. He was just in that one scene, which is so random.
And that's the real thing that needs to come back in part 2. Like, if he's not back in the movie, it's all a failure.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Just to bring it back quickly to that point, though, of like the part 1, part 2 thing, like I wanted to say, sort of in reaction to what you said earlier at the start of our conversation, I guess. Like, so some of them that have happened in recent years, there's, I think, Avengers Infinity War going into Endgame.
Right.
There is recently, as I mentioned earlier in the episode, the new Spider-Verse movie that is one of those that just like, all right, come back for the rest. Like, yeah, it's very much, it reminded me so much of Dune, where like, I'm like, well, I liked that, but I hope it was good. I won't know for a few years.
Yeah. It's like watching half a movie.
Yeah. In Dune, of course. And I feel like there's another one I'm forgetting right now. Probably, but yeah, it is like a weird trend. I guess like everything's gone, this Hollywood has gone so sort of maximalist.
Sure.
That there's a way in which it makes sense that this was like the end game, not to make a pun about it, but of like the movies were too big for one movie at this point. But like, it is just like a little deflating every time I get to the end of part 1, and I'm like, all right, I'm invested in this. Like, it would have been nice to have some more sense of resolution before having to wait for the rest.
Yeah,
you know,
I agree.
So
I think it's a
big gamble.
It's a big gamble, and it's an interesting experiment. I don't know that it is paying off. Because I feel like it's sort of, and I think the maximalism is also a trend that I'm not like, I don't know that I needed this movie to be as long as it is. And and I feel like that started when Dark Knight Rises was 3 hours. It was like, okay, this is what we do now. We just make long ass action movies. And now the last Bond was 2 hours and 45 minutes long, and John Wick 4 is 2 hours and 45 minutes long. And it's like, I like long movie. Like, I don't mind a long movie, but it's just sort of, it's like you're just pulling out all the stops for no reason to a certain degree. Like, it doesn't necessarily feel earned. I think there was a lot going on in this one. I think this one earned it a little bit more than some of those other ones did, but you know,
I think of the ones I've mentioned and that we're talking about, I guess the only one that's actually completed the loop, so to speak, is that Avengers double. And I do think that one was successful, but I think so much of the success of that was that it wasn't really like just those two movies. It was the culmination of so much. So it felt okay to have like that sunken cost at the end of part 1 and be like, I'll come back for this. And it wasn't like that bad a wait, you know. That.
They set it up so that you really knew they were on top of putting out the next one. Yeah. And I also think that for that, it was kind of a surprise, right? Like, you didn't know it was going to end that way. And they sort of shocked you with it. Yeah. Whereas here, they're blatantly saying, this is part 1. So just remember that there is a part 2. Like that. You know, that sort of.
You like, you knew that other movie was coming, but you didn't know it was going to be so like up in the air that way. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Exactly.
I agree with that. And I mean, I guess the Dune thing, like I've never been able to get through the Dune books as much as I would like to. But I guess if you've read those, like it makes total sense. But as a moviegoer, and that's the way I'm consuming this, I'm like, all of this was so well made. I don't like, I just want to feel like I left with something a little more solid, you know?
Right.
But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I agree.
But I guess I wonder also if this is like one of those things that's sort of cyclical and makes sense that it's happening in a way, not saying it's justified necessarily, but like in the same way that so many movies went big and epic in the 50s because they were like, well, television, we have to compete with that bullshit and get people to come out of their home and actually invest some time and money rather than sit on their couch for free and watch that.
Yeah.
You know, and like that's the state we're at with streaming and stuff. Like you can watch so much, and so many movies are going straight to streaming that would have never done that 10, 20 years ago, that like you really have to motivate someone to make that leap of like paying what has become such an expensive cost to go see a movie for so many people in so many places.
Right.
And like, I guess the thinking is like, if we're going to get them out here, we want to give them everything at once.
Right.
While we got them,
right.
You know, and you want to make people feel like they got their money's worth.
Yeah.
But then you still have the little movie that comes out sometimes, and like, you're like, that was worth it. And I like seeing that with the crowd, you know?
Well, Maverick was 2 hours long, you know, like, I mean,
was it only 2 hours? I don't remember.
Maybe it was a little more, but it wasn't 3.
Sure.
And
fair enough.
It was, and and even though a lot happens in it and there's a lot of action, I wouldn't say that it's bloated in any way.
Right.
So I think there's a way you can do it that is just not, doesn't have that feeling of excess. But you know, I like Dune. I loved this. I mean, Mission Impossible's gotten to the point similar to how I am with the Bond movies, where it's like, you really can do no wrong for me. Like, I'm just not going to dislike it. And I have a lot of faith in McQuarrie and Cruise to put something really cool in front of me.
Right.
It's just that sometimes they do it in a way that I just think Fallout was such a surprise for a lot of people, myself included, where it's just like, I can't believe you guys made like that great a movie.
And it's even that, like, I think there was 2 rounds of surprise, I thought, because first off, you know, I think that people had that similar feeling of what you're describing, of being like, can they really do this? Can they accomplish what they're setting out to do? And then like the first reviews were like so glowing. I was like, there's no way it can be that good. You know, it set the expectation so high. And then I went and saw the movie. I was like, fuck yeah. They did it.
Right.
They were right. So that's rare.
Yeah.
That is so rare.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
But yeah.
And we're not really there on this one, but that's okay.
But I think that is largely because of the part 1 of it.
Yeah, I think so too. Do you have a favorite sequence?
I guess off the top of my head, I'd say the train stuff. Just because like part of it was like, it was reminiscent of the very first movie.
Right, for sure.
And then, like I mentioned in the review, it reminded me of like Buster Keaton's The General,
right,
in a way,
right,
of like this old train going over an exploded bridge.
Yeah.
And I was like cackling in the best possible way when they were like running up all those train cars one after one.
Oh yeah.
Once that set off, I was just like, this is fucking amazing.
Yeah, that was cool.
This. Yeah, it was so cool.
Yeah, I really liked that.
So entertaining.
Yeah.
So back to the point though of McQuarrie and his run. I agree. Like, it's been so good. There is a part of me though that like wonders if like, was it ever possible for this series to be what it originally seemed to be set up to be by Tom Cruise himself as the producer and star of this franchise, of like having A-list directors on everyone. That's what I mean. He
Right.
really only did on the first two when you get down to it, like
Yeah.
of having an auteur come in,
Right.
with Brian De Palma on one
Mm-hmm.
and John Woo on two, and then he went to like TV guy,
right.
J.J. Abrams at that time,
Yeah.
and arguably still,
Yeah.
on three, and it's been like, what was it?
It was
Brad
Brad
Bird
on 4.
yeah, but McQuarrie wrote that one, right? Am I wrong in that? I don't
No,
remember.
he didn't.
He didn't?
No.
Okay. So McQuarrie came after that.
Yeah.
And it's been his ship since.
Yeah.
But like, do you think this could have ever actually worked in that mold? Or not? Did it need somebody who's like the seeming creative partner
Mm-hmm.
with Tom Cruise, who he trusts and can kind of rely on to get the vision down?
Yeah, I think it could have worked. There's a great if you love Mission Impossible and want to get real granular, there's a great podcast called Light the Fuse. And they go deep and they like do interviews with people, and there's a whole episode about Oliver Stone's Mission Impossible 2, which never got made.
Really?
Yeah. And so I think he could have done it. It could have gone in that direction. I think ultimately that the second one was John Woo, and it was so dramatically different from the first, kind of put the kibosh on it.
Yeah, just upended it.
Yeah, and I think also a lack of like auteur directors kind of also
That's true.
Keeps that from happening. I mean, you know, who would you, Quentin Tarantino? Like who would you have be the person?
I mean, he wanted to do Bond so bad.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have.
I know. And yeah, and I think, and rightfully so, because he would just like make it super violent and throw the N-word in there somewhere. And as he's wont to do. It's, you know, I don't know who it would be. I don't know how they would keep that going. I feel like the whole thing is very serendipitous in a way, because it seemed like after 2, I mean, it took forever for 2 to come out, and then 2 was like so crazy different, and then it was like, all right, I guess that's that. And then 3 was like, okay, that was cool, but whatever. And then 4 was like, you know, this is pretty good. Like this is working. And then he meets McQuarrie on Valkyrie, and they just like hit it off, and it's like it's in the stars, you know? Right. I think that's just kind of how it happens.
Yeah. I mean, I do think there's a world in which it could have worked, but like it would have just been so different, you know?
Yeah.
Because I do think they wouldn't have been able to keep that through line that they've established at this point. Even kind of retrospectively, I think some of that was like, as we've kind of talked about, I think earlier, like manufactured after the fact of saying like, oh, that thing that happened before, now we're saying it's because of this, or we're building.
Oh yeah,
totally.
That, you know? Totally.
But like I could imagine a world where like Danny Boyle did one in the early 2000s or in the 2000s or something.
Sure.
And then more recently, like maybe Ryan Coogler or something like that, you know? Like there are people out there, but I do think you're right that the auteur is not as prevalent as it once was.
Right.
The idea of having that, or it's just changed in a way.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. There's also, we have to remember that it's based on a TV show, and I don't know I've never watched the TV show. I remember when I was young, before 2, so this is in between 1 and 2. So I'm a young lad, and this guy was talking to me about Mission Impossible, and I was like, I really like Mission Impossible. And he's like, did you ever see Star Trek 1? And I said, yes. And in Star Trek 1, for those who don't know, there's like this shitty, like annoying character who challenges Captain Kirk throughout the movie. And he's like, what they did in Mission Impossible by killing everyone and having Cruise be the main guy is like if they did Star Trek 1 and that dude became the captain and they killed everybody else. So I always remember that as like, there's, these, I wonder about these sort of super fans of the show and the legacy of how the movie just like totally blew up whatever the show was.
Yeah.
And I don't know if McQuarrie seems like the kind of guy who would be into the show, and maybe there's like Easter eggs and stuff like that in the movies that I don't know about, but it's just always funny to remember that this is like more than just the movies.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely remember, I think I saw an episode or two when I was very young and could not tell you a damn thing about the show at this point.
Yeah.
But I do remember seeing the first Mission Impossible in theaters, and even without that like base knowledge of what the property was before, I was sort of like, oh wow, he just kills everyone. It's just like, I thought this was like a team.
Right.
And they basically kill the team off in the first 15 minutes or something.
Yeah.
And then it's like guy on the run.
Right.
I was kind of surprised by that and sort of like, what could this have been instead of this?
Yeah.
I think it's ended up in a good place. And anytime I've gone back to part one, I enjoy it more now than I did then. I don't know how much of that is because of what's been built on top of it. But anyway. Yeah. The Star Trek thing is interesting. I mean, there's a whole thing I could get into on that like we don't have time for.
Right. But, I just always remember him telling me that, and I was like, so for a 13-year-old, I was like, whoa.
Well, thank you, Chuck. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to Stereoactive Presents, and thank you to our guest, Charles Hinshaw. The music in this podcast is composed by Hansdale Sue. My name is Jeremiah McVay. If you like what you hear in the show, please rate and review it in Good Pods, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that allows that. Doing so helps us to expand our audience, and it's much appreciated. And please follow us wherever you happen to listen to podcasts. Every little bit helps us grow our audience. You can also get in touch with us at stereoactivemedia@gmail.com, and you can find more information about this show and everything else that Stereoactive Media is involved with at stereoactivemedia.com. This podcast is produced by Stereoactive Media.